Hello and welcome to Best for Women Live. I am so excited to have you here today because we are talking about a topic that I get asked about all the time, which is negotiation. So let me tell you a little bit about our guest today because I'm super excited to have Fotini here. So she was nicknamed the negotiator as a child, a skill she's been honing her whole life. We're definitely going to ask her about that. And for the last decade, I love this, she's been helping Fortune 500 companies through high stakes scenarios and facilitated intensive negotiation workshops for clients across the globe. She's got her first book, Say Less, Get More. Love the title. And when she's not with clients, she's a TV guest. She's an instructor of MBA negotiations in Toronto, and she offers her experience to nonprofit initiatives because she's determined to close the gender gap before it starts. Oh yes, how awesome is that? So joining me today will be Fotini. She is a master of negotiation, and we are hoping that she will be here very shortly to join us. I know I saw her a little bit already. Amazing. I love it. I love the power of being able to meet when we've never met. It's awfully fun.
Oops.
Hello, welcome.
Hello. Let me just turn I don't know why my camera is facing the other way. There we go.
There you are. Welcome,
Oddly, I
Fotini.
can't, I don't know what's going on, but I can't see your face.
Oh,
I'm just
that's
seeing you,
interesting.
but that's okay.
Okay,
I can
well,
hear you,
hello.
so that's all right. Hi.
Well, that's the most important part. It should be on well, it's on a split screen for me, but I know every device does things a little bit differently. So, but absolutely
Yeah,
delighted to have you here.
my split, unfortunately, is a black square above my head, but it doesn't matter because at least I can hear you, and that's all that
Oh,
really matters.
perfect. Well, I waved, I said a great hello, and I'm super excited to have you here today.
I'm very excited to be here.
Amazing. We are going to be talking about my favorite topic, and I know it's definitely yours, which is negotiation.
Absolutely my favorite topic.
Yeah, I know. I love this. So, before we dig into this, I want to give you a
Oops.
moment to introduce yourself. And then I'm going to ask you how you ended up with this as a nickname as a child.
So my name is Fotini Iconomopoulos. For those who don't know, you'll have to excuse my voice. I woke up sick this morning, but I have been negotiating my whole life. When you grow up in a very strict household, you have to negotiate your way out of it. And so it was my dad when I was constantly trying to negotiate, going out of the house, attending events, going to away to university, all of these things were things that I've been negotiating forever. So he nicknamed me the negotiator probably when I was about 6 years old. And it stuck. And to this day, I'm a woman in my 40s, and he'll still say every once in a while, "We don't need to hear from you, negotiator," when I am talking about a family matter that we're trying to negotiate together as a unit. So it foreshadowed an entire career.
I love that. I love that was the influence. It was your dad that you had, I guess, who gave you the nickname, but who was your primary negotiations with? Was it with him or your mom or a
Oh,
combination of
it was
both?
him.
It was him.
It was him 24/7. My mom didn't want to get involved. She's like, "Talk to your father about that. That's not my that's not my problem."
I love that. I love
Because
that.
she didn't want to negotiate with him either.
Oh, fair enough. Fair enough. Okay, so Fotini, I want to ask a little bit because we think about sometimes careers. You and I sound like we're in roughly the same age bracket, and when I grew up, negotiator was not a career. Well, I'm going to be bold and say it was not a career for women, but it was also a career that was really not defined. Right? It was you're going to be a teacher, you're going to be a doctor, a lawyer. There's all these things that are common that we get put in front of us. But negotiator is often not one of the career paths that ever gets talked about. So tell me what it as a career path in negotiation actually look like.
It's not one that is intentional. It certainly isn't one that was well thought out. It was simply I did my MBA in organization behavior straight out of my undergrad, and I was recruited by companies like L'Oreal. So I spent a number of years working with them and negotiating with Walmart in a sales role on how to get more product flow and get more attention on, L'Oreal products and so on. And then I was recruited by another company to do the same thing, and that's when they had hired this negotiation training company to teach us to be more effective at what we do.
Mm.
And at the end of this 4-day training program, it was this company, this facilitator who went, "You should really be doing what we do." And I was like, yeah, sure, someday when I've got more experience. I hadn't even turned 30 yet. I was like, what CEO or what, senior executive is going to listen to me telling them how to negotiate more effectively? But it was these people who kept insisting, no, really, you should be doing what we do. And it took them a year to convince me to come on board. And when I did, I joined this British company. I was traveling all over the world, spending most of my time in the US where companies were the largest and there was the biggest demand for my skill set. And that's how I started training all of these folks, everybody from the CEO of an oil and gas billion-dollar company to a junior account manager at a consumer goods company. And then when that continued and I was training for a couple of years, it was the same clients that I was training who went, it's great that you trained our team, but we have $1 million on the line. We have $1 billion on the line. What do we do? What do we say? And that evolved into this, okay, I guess I'll consult with you on your real life negotiations. I'll sit in the war room with you. I'll plot out what to do and what to say, how to change the power dynamics and all of these other things. So that's sort of just how it evolved naturally. And when I quit that company, I didn't know what my next move was going to be. It just was not serving me anymore. I thought it'll be easy for me to get a job doing what I was doing before because I have this now even further developed skill set.
Yeah.
But that just didn't feel like the right move for me. But it was clients who kept going, when are you going to come back and work with us? When are you going to come help us on this thing? And so I thought it would just be this temporary thing that I would do until I have to get a real job. And that just really kept going and going for such a long time that other opportunities came up. So it was my alma mater at the Schulich School of Business went, hey, do you want to come back and teach MBA negotiations? And I was like, that sounds like fun. Why not? And then HarperCollins went, we think you should write a book. And I was like, okay. So all of these things just came up because I just kept putting myself in positions where I was helping folks and I was demonstrating this skill set and they just kept giving me these really cool opportunities. So it really wasn't an intentional career path. And it was 9 years ago that I, quit that job and thought this was going to be temporary, but I can finally admit that it's a full-time gig.
I love that. Okay. I want to pick apart a couple of things that I really, really appreciated. One of them is that it sounds like you actually sort of transitioned into this path through procurement, which I find really interesting because a good friend of mine actually started out as a lawyer and ended up in procurement. Because for her, it was negotiating the contract side of things, as opposed to the hard negotiation, the verbal negotiation. For her, it was a contract review, also in procurement. So have you found others have, is there, we would just unpack a little bit more about how procurement and negotiation fit together. So in terms of being in sales, in terms of getting product onto shelves, what sort of skill sets did you start to acquire there?
So for those who don't know the word procurement, it really is a buyer. So when you're dealing with, the Walmart folks, the Holt Renfrew, the Saks Fifth Avenue, the airlines, whomever it is, the people who are buying either product on shelf or services, janitorial services, or anything else. These are the folks who are in a buying position. Now, when I started my career, I was in the selling position. So I was selling, these products through to major retailers. And all the time I get questions from my MBA students and the folks that I do guest lectures for when they say, I really enjoy negotiating. How do I do a job that is more of it? And that procurement and sales role are really the two things that have the most everyday negotiations. They're more traditional in the sense of there's going to be a price attached to a widget or a service. But that's all you do all day in and day out. Is when you're in a procurement role, when you're in that buying and selling of goods and services, that's what you're doing on a regular basis, is figuring out a deal that's going to work for everybody. In theory, lawyers do a lot of negotiating as well. In practice, not always, because they do a lot of just reviewing documents and things of that nature too. So there's very different practices of law where people assume that there's a lot of negotiation involved, but there may actually not be. And there's not actually a lot of training in law school for that skill set, ironically, because I end up getting a lot of lawyers coming through my training programs and my classes.
I love that. And you know what, I'm going to say boldly, I don't think negotiation is really taught in a lot of places. I mean, obviously you're teaching it in an MBA capacity, but for a lot of professions or a lot of very specific career paths, negotiation doesn't fit in as one of them.
Well, and it's even in where I'm teaching, it's an elective. It's not a required course. It likely should be because effective negotiation skills are so useful in every aspect of our lives. But very rarely is it considered a required course. It's an organizational behavioral skill. Like it falls under the umbrella of organizational behavior when you're in an academic environment. But if it wasn't for the companies that I worked for and hiring negotiation training companies like the one I worked for at later, I don't know that I would have further developed the skill. And it's such a valuable skill. Like it has saved me years of early retirement. It has saved me thousands and thousands, if not more than that, dollars in my lifetime. It's gotten me deals on better mortgages, on better cars, on, time and boundaries and stress levels, all of these things. It's contributed in so many healthy ways to my life. And yet we don't find opportunities to teach it on a regular basis.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, so we're going to dig in because we're already getting questions about like how do we prepare on the selling side. So I love the question that just came in. It's from Marakich Sweets and Savories. So what kinds of resources or materials can we read to prepare meeting a store to get them to sell our products? So I think we're probably going to head into that one because that's sort of almost jumping ahead for us. But tell us a little bit about what's involved in negotiation. We've been talking about it. You sort of framed it that it's a bit of getting to a deal. What are some of the things or the principles around negotiation that you found to be really successful?
Look, when it comes to preparation, we actually have it a lot easier these days than 20 years ago because we have this thing called Google at our fingertips. And when it comes to negotiation preparation in general, you just need to do some research. You don't have to read a ton of books, though I recommend it. I certainly recommend my own as a good starting point. But when you're going into a negotiation, whether it's with a new retailer, a new supplier, somebody who's selling you a car, whatever it is, you want to make sure that you are researching what are the going rates for these things? What is the market like? You want to know what is the context that you're in, because I think everybody can agree, you've heard of the old phrase, knowledge is power. So the more knowledge you have, the more knowledgeable you are going into this negotiation, the more you can increase your credibility and the better proposal you'll be able to make as a result. So, one of the easiest negotiations I talk about that I think everybody can sort of relate to in some way is salary negotiations. So people will ask me all the time about those. And they're like, what should I do? Well, what is the going rate for people with your skill set? What is the going rate for people with your education level, with your experience level, and so on? Search all the websites, all the Googles, and so on. Search industry platforms and mentors and things like that to find out what people are getting paid. So when you have that picture of here's the average salary for this person with this skill set and so on, then you go and ask yourself the question, am I average? And hopefully the answer is no. So don't use that average as a limiting factor. Then you've got to factor in, what am I bringing to the table? What am I doing that's above and beyond? If you are selling sweets to a retailer, to somebody else, well, your product, I'm assuming you think, is superior for a reason. So you're going to add on that additional, let's call it the not average tax, to make sure that you're proposing something that's not going to shortchange you, that you're proposing something that shows the value that you are bringing to this. Now they can try and negotiate with you and say, well, that's too much for us, and so on and so forth. But at least you're starting this conversation in a credible, objective way. But that all starts from doing the research. And that research doesn't have to be complicated. I mean, I do say use Google. I do say use a lot of different websites for salaries and stuff. It would be Glassdoor. For other industries, it might be something else. But you do need to make sure that you're searching credible sources. And those credible sources can also be people, like I said, mentors, people around you, people who know a thing or two about what it is that you're doing. People have been in your shoes before you and can give you some history. But just because they limited themselves doesn't mean you have to limit yourself here. You can take it to that extra level as long as you come across as credible.
Oh, okay. What does credible look like in practice?
So it's really a gut instinct thing. So if I'm going for a salary, for example, let's use really simple numbers like $100,000. So I'm looking for a salary based on what I'm finding out there, what is comparable to someone with my skill set, experience, and so on. If I'm aiming for this 100,000, you're not going to go into a negotiation like that asking for 200,000, because you dropping like within a few minutes 100,000 or dropping in half, which for some reason people tend to do. That's a trend we tend to see. Then you're not going to come across as very credible. You're going to come across as someone who's playing games and not necessarily as trustworthy. But asking for 113,000, asking for 107,000, those types of numbers that look like they're credible, they're well thought out, they're not crazy extreme and so on, those are the numbers. It's really just going, how far, given the context of what I'm dealing with, given the person sitting across from me, given the current state of affairs, maybe it is a recession or a non-recession, or there's super high demand for people with my skills. Maybe that credibility goes a little bit further if you're so high in demand. It's really just asking yourself this question of, what is my gut telling me? Does this number sound credible? Maybe you need to ask some people in your world. Again, mentors are really great for this. People who are in your position and, people who have similar backgrounds and so on, to help you gauge that gut instinct. But it's really, the big question is, I want everybody to ask themselves is, how credible do I sound right now? And I don't want your imposter syndrome to get in the way. I don't want your insecurity to get in the way. I want you to look at it as objectively as possible. And usually that objectivity comes from feeding that off of somebody else.
So this is a combination of research that you've done, conversations you've had in preparation, and then ask yourself, how credible, how realistic is what I'm asking relative to the data, not necessarily how it feels on the inside, because it might feel uncomfortable to be able to ask for that, but you're going to anyways.
Yeah, uncomfortable is a good thing. Uncomfortable pushes us to new heights. So, I know it's going to be really uncomfortable. People ask me all the time, they're like, are you sure I can negotiate this? And I'm like, I'm sure, because if you do it in a way that is collaborative, if you do it in a way that is curious, if you do it in a way that is not going to make it feel like a boxing match, that is not going to be abrasive, then anybody who can't afford to do what you're asking, all they have to do is say, you know what, we can't afford that. And then all you have to do back is say, well, then what can you do? And it's a very simple conversation between two people. And that shouldn't result in the fear of what so many people, especially women, what holds so many people back is, what if they retaliate? What if they rescind the offer? What if they get really mad at me? But if you're being credible, if you're being collaborative, if you're sounding curious instead of demanding and aggressive, then there's no reason why they should retaliate. And if they do, then you've just dodged a bullet, because you should not be doing business with that person. You should not be committing to something with that person. If that's the kind of tactics that they're doing, then you should not be in a position to negotiate with them.
Okay, so let's pick up a little bit on that. So what are some of the cues that you get back from across the table that you've seen as red flags?
And so I always tell people all the time, ask questions. When someone says, we can't do that, okay, well, what can you do? Or when they say something like, you need more experience, what does experience mean to you? I'll ask those types of questions, because I don't want anybody to allow things to stay vague. If things are vague, it's very hard to follow up on things. It's very hard to get to that next step. It's very hard to break down the barriers and have a trustworthy relationship. It's when they're too vague in their answers. If they've said, when you have more experience, we'll be able to give you a raise like that. Okay, well, what does experience mean? Well, we'll know it when we see it. Okay, but that's not a satisfying answer. That what do you typically see in people that you think have great levels of experience? What does experience mean to you? What do you think experience is going to bring to the table? How do you think experience is going to affect my performance? All of those things, if they can't answer them, they're just giving you the runaround. And that for me is a huge red flag. When they're not answering questions, when they're continuing to be vague, those are the things that scream red flag, that I wonder, what are they hiding? Or are they just, stringing me along for God knows how long?
Yeah. Oh, thank you for giving such concrete examples. Because I think oftentimes, we use words like credible, we use words like red flags, but oftentimes it's like, okay, I get that that's a thing, but what is it going to look like when it's happening to me in the moment? And how do I recognize in the moment that I should be flagging this as bad or red or with caution, right?
We don't want to jump to conclusions, but if you are really mindful, if you are intentional about the questions that you ask, and you are prepared with questions that you should be asking, if you just take whatever they say and just dig a little bit deeper, ask a how or a what question. How is that relevant? What does that mean to you? These are very generic questions that you can really use to dig in a little bit further. They're curious questions. So if you're coming to the table ready with those, they work in any type of atmosphere you're in. I don't care if you're a small business owner, if you're a corporate executive, anything in between, you're going to be able to leverage these types of things to dig in a little bit deeper, to build a little bit more trust and relationship between you. But if they're resisting every step of the way, then you have that confirmation. You can be able to rest your head on your pillow at night and go, okay, now I feel good that I tried everything I possibly could, and they still weren't budging on anything.
So feeling really comfortable with even a decision to maybe walk away, maybe say no, maybe try something different.
Yeah, absolutely.
Amazing. We're getting tons of hearts. I'm not sure if you can see them coming up the screen. It's amazing. And we've got a comment as well that this was so informative. So again, thank you for the specificity. It's really helpful. You talked about a couple other pieces that I wanted to just ask, because you sort of gave some examples of different people in negotiation. And I know you've worked with so many different types of people in many, many roles. So have you seen any structural nuances, anything that's maybe different in different industries, different contexts, whether you're a small business or a CEO, um, that's just from your experience you've seen as a nuanced difference, or is negotiation more of a, just sort of helping us get a feel for some of the nuances versus sort of the core skill, I'll say.
I don't know that I can really pinpoint any particular nuances. I'm sure if someone gave me a specific example, I'd be able to color that a little bit more. But the general principles, like one of the reasons I wrote the book, was when HarperCollins said, we think you should write a book. And I was like, okay, that's great. I appreciate the compliment, but why another negotiation book? And they simply said, we think you have a voice that people need to hear. I think the difference in nuance now is that some of the books that have been around for a really long time still are just as useful. There's a lot of fantastic principles. I quote a lot of them in my book. They are like the Bible for all things negotiation, like getting to yes and getting past no. But one of the things that I'm finding for some of the books that might have come out in a male-dominated era in the workplace, those are the nuances that I find don't work today. So I was given, even as a young woman in my role, I was given the advice of, you need to be this way and you can go ahead and push their boundaries and blah, blah, blah. And that didn't work for me. I found via trial and error that what was working for my all male colleagues was not working for me, especially as a younger woman, as a woman in general, as somebody whose name people couldn't pronounce. Those are the nuances that they weren't getting that I needed to figure out on my own. And when I started reading more about women in negotiation and what's going on these days, those are the things when I think about disadvantaged groups, whether you're a woman, and maybe in another country, women aren't disadvantaged, but maybe you're somebody who's not part of the dominant group. Maybe you're somebody who experiences bias in some way, shape, or form. It could be age, gender, race, anything. When you think about those, for me, are the nuances that are really important. I don't think they change per industry because I have touched, I think, every industry under the sun, but they have changed in that we have evolved, because what worked a long time ago, a lot of the stuff you see in the historic bestsellers, that banging your fist on the table, my way or the highway kind of stuff, that doesn't fly today. One of the reasons is we have stuff like Google. We have information at our fingertips. We are far more powerful than what used to happen. And the biggest part is we have to be more accountable than we've ever been before, because everybody will leave you a review, whether it's on Yelp, whether it's on some kind of Google website, whatever it is. Even when you're taking an Uber, you are getting reviewed. If you don't treat people well, that's going to come back and bite you if you have a super low rating. So we are now far more accountable because that information is available to everybody. And that information is very powerful, but it's also really dangerous. So we do need to be more collaborative in general than we have been in the past. That doesn't mean everyone's going to be your best friend. It certainly doesn't mean that everybody has your best interests in mind, so we have to be mindful of that. But the nuance of going into something with empathy and curiosity are probably the most important parts versus, 20 years ago, that demanding, that banging fist on table aggression might have gotten you much further for the dominant group. For the not so dominant groups, that didn't work. And now what I'm finding is the lowest common denominator. If I can find skills and techniques that work for them, those are techniques that are going to work for everybody. And I think we're depending on those more and more today, thanks to the transparency of having information everywhere and that accountability that we are now kind of tied to, which is, I think, is a good thing.
Oh, I agree. It's a good thing. What I love about what you're saying is I'm having similar conversations in leadership spaces where before this concept of executive presence, where you came in almost in a place of creating fear in the other person, the intense eye stare, the awkward, very long silence. And we're going to dig into that because I know Say Less, Get More is the title of your book. So we're going to sort of dig into how silence plays a role, but like those intense silences, the my way or the highway, I sometimes call them puffy chest tactics. I think you know what I mean if you've ever
Yeah.
seen any negotiation in movies, what they used to look like. And I think even in leadership, those were the same types of tactics that people expected of senior leaderships. It's oftentimes a description used to call executive presence and the idea of gravitas, and they lacked humanity in some cases. And I think that's starting to what I'm seeing as a shift as well, more broadly, not just in negotiation, but in leadership, which also is a form of negotiation with employees and in day to day.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you talk about leadership, if you want people to follow you as a leader, if you want them to follow your ideas and your proposals, that is a negotiation. So 100%, you're not going to leading by, banging fists on tables now, by tyranny, by authoritarianism. That just doesn't work. And we see that with people quitting jobs in those types of places.
Yeah. And that aggression also comes in a couple of different forms as well, in the language people choose to use. So you talked about empathy, curiosity, which is a very different type of language than this sort of authority and demand language as well. But I wanted to know if you'd be comfortable to dig into this idea of silence and how you came up with the title of your book.
It was fun. We actually really struggled to come up with the title of the book. And I was talking to another friend of mine, a colleague actually in Australia who does very similar work to me. And I was telling her about some scenario that I was dealing with a client. And she was like, "Oh, what you just said, that feels like a book title." And I was like, "Oh, it was just a natural conversation that we were having and just the phrasing of what I said, I want them to say less and get more out of it." That's sort of how it evolved. And I was like, oh, yeah, because this is, one of the things that I find, the biggest trend that I find in negotiation is people will talk themselves out of a deal. And so there's a couple nuances to this. One is physically say fewer words because don't talk and think at the same time. And then actually taking the time to say less for a moment and think through, what do I want to say right now? What is it that I need to convey in this moment? Because when we're nervous, we tend to feel like we have to fill that time, that airspace. And I think women especially tend to think and talk at the same time, like we're thinking out loud. And so that can get us into trouble. But if you just pause for a second, it's going to feel really awkward, because one of the big fears is they're going to think I'm stupid. They're going to think I don't know what I'm talking about if I don't answer right away, because people always say to me, "I'm not quick like you. I don't have a response for everything." I'm like, that's not a terrible thing. In fact, introverts can rejoice because you don't have to be thinking and talking. You can get yourself into trouble thinking and talking. But what if just for a moment you said, "I need a moment to think about that"? Now all of a sudden you're not looking stupid. You're looking like, "Ooh, I better be careful, because whatever is going to come out of her mouth is going to be super credible if she's taking the time to think it through." They're on the edge of their seats as opposed to thinking, "She's stupid. Why isn't she answering me right now?" You're taking control. You're showing authority by going, "I need a moment. I'm going to take a moment to write that down. You mentioned something. I want to take a second to make sure I've incorporated it, or to make sure I'm giving you the most appropriate answer. I want to make sure that we're getting to a place that's going to serve us both, Beth. Give me a second to think that through." And so if you can do that, if you can own the pause, you're going to give your brain a chance to recover from that fight or flight mode. And whatever's going to come out next is going to be far more credible and authoritative than what you were doing when you were thinking and talking. And when we are nervous, we use these filler words. We use words that are damaging, that hurt our credibility. So I want people to truncate what it is they're saying and say less. Like, I get messages from friends who are going through divorces and managing, things like child custody agreements and whatever else, and they're asking me for help, and I'm like, you need to cut out 10 words from at least that text message or that email and so on. Those are some of the things that we talk about, because when you put too many words, too many excuses, too many items in that proposal, then you're just giving them more to pick at and poke at and potentially poke holes in. So I don't want people to end up in that position. So I want people to be more thoughtful and more mindful and take that time to pause and think through what they're going to say, instead of getting into that thinking and talking danger zone.
You mentioned taking notes as well. So tell me how you've used that, or how you've seen note taking as a strength, as a strategy, I'll say.
So there's a couple reasons why note taking is so valuable. One is because our brains are not built for multitasking. I won't bore everybody with the science behind the brain and the psychology, but basically we are not good at doing more than one thing at a time. And so when people say, "I have a really great memory," I'm like, no, you don't. You might think you do, but there's going to be pieces that you're missing. And you walk out of that after the big adrenaline rush or whatever that meeting is, and you don't remember some of the super important things that they said. If you are writing stuff down, it makes it very easy to use their words to your advantage. So they mentioned this word. That sounds like a really big priority. They use this word a few times. And so if you're writing down those types of nuances, if you're writing down the details of what was their proposal and even what was your last proposal, so there's no confusion, that certainly makes a much more productive conversation. But the other thing that most people don't realize is just in the act of note taking, the perception on the other side is you're more credible and you're more interested in what I have to say. So it's actually a perception of being able to build trust because you are paying more attention to me versus ignoring me or dismissing me, or you didn't listen to what I had to say. Taking notes is a sign of listening. Listening is an act of building trust. So you can demonstrate that with your actions as well as your words, but it also serves you at the same time. So there's a couple reasons why note taking is so important.
Oh, we're getting 100% floating up on the screen. And we've got a comment here as well. Own the pause with a big heart. I love that. It's a really important one. And it is, you talked about discomfort before. It can be really uncomfortable.
Yeah. So if you're uncomfortable with that silence and you know that you need that silence to collect your thoughts, to look credible and so on, imagine how much more uncomfortable they're feeling in that silence because you're prepared for it. And when they're uncomfortable in that silence, they're more likely to do the thinking and talking at the same time and give you that valuable information that's going to be so useful as you continue this conversation with them. So if you're uncomfortable, that's okay. They're going to be so much more uncomfortable, and that's going to work to your favor because if you do something that makes them more comfortable, like tell me a little bit more about yourself. I'd love to understand a little bit more about this priority thing that you've mentioned a couple of times. Now all of a sudden they feel a little bit more at ease, and you're the one that gave them that gift. So they're indebted to you in some way. So it works in so many ways to your favor.
Are there other, you've talked about a couple of things. You've talked about things that hold us back. We've talked about a little bit of the difference between the dominant and non-dominant groups. Are there any strategies, tactics, things that tips that you give to your students before their test that you would want to share with our group?
I actually do. There's a really cool study, and I feel like I've talked about this on every stage I've ever been on. Back in 2013, they did a study where they had people sing in front of a group, and I'm very comfortable on a microphone and on a stage, but I know that it is the number 2 fear after death in most places. And so when people see a microphone, they freak out. And so what they did with this is they put these folks into 3 different groups with 3 different sets of instructions. And they told the first group, regardless of how you're actually feeling, I want you to tell yourself, I am anxious. And they told the second group, regardless of how you're feeling, I want you to tell yourself, I am excited. And then they told nothing to the third group. They just let that be our sample group. And so what they found, according to a computer that measured each singer's volume and pitch, the group that told themselves, I am excited, outperformed the other 2 groups. And we know it wasn't because of their vocal talents. We know it was because of their mindset, because they also outperformed them on a math test and a speech test. So all this says is that when you can psych yourself up, you are going to get better results. But if you psych yourself out, that I am anxious mentality, I'm nervous about this, I don't want to do this kind of mentality, you're going to give yourself worse results. So even with my students, before a test, I would tell them, aren't you excited about this? I'm so excited to see what all of this hard work is how it's going to pay off for you. When I'm talking to clients, I'm saying things like, I'm so excited for you to get the outcome from all of this hard work that we've been putting together. I'm so excited about how prepared you all are for this really intense conversation that's going to happen. And that can make a world of difference from what we know about human performance in the brain. So can you get yourself excited? If you're working with someone else, if you're a real estate agent who has a client who's really nervous about putting in an offer, can you say something like, I'm so excited for the life that you're going to build in this new house, and then they won't have buyer's remorse afterwards. So those are some of the things that little tiny habits like this can go a really long way in terms of performance.
I really like this because as you're sharing this example, I'm imagining also the advice of you go where you look, right? So thinking of driving, especially if you drive a bike, it's not about where you want to go. It's not about where you think you're steering. Wherever you look, that's where you're going to go, whether it's into a curb or into oncoming traffic or directly down the path that you had intended. It's really about where you set your sights is where you're going to go to. So we have a fabulous question for you if you're comfortable to answer. These are great insights, says Antonia. What do you do to hype yourself up before going on stage?
I really feel like it's a natural thing for me. I've always enjoyed being on stage. And when I was doing stage work and training and consulting, the stage stuff was always my favorite. And I was in Ottawa last week at the Art of Leadership conference, talking to, 1,000 women in the room in Ottawa at the convention center. And I was backstage and I was just kind of looking at the audience, and I'm super excited to share what I have to share with them. Like, I get energy from going, oh, this is a great group of people that I now get to talk to and I get to hang out with for 55 minutes on the stage. There's not a lot that I would do other than that. I always look at my notes one last time just to make sure that my brain goes to knows exactly what to say first, because sometimes in all of that excitement you can get lost and go, what was I going to say again? So I have that, that first story in my brain ready to go, and then it all sort of flows after that when I get in the zone. But for me, getting in the zone is getting excited about who's out there. I often meet people beforehand. I meet whether it's the event organizers or somebody in the crowd or the host or even the sound people. I'm excited when I get to talk to them, and being in a good mood like that. And being thankful to them and, joking around with them backstage puts them in a great mood and puts me in a great mood. And then when I'm in a great mood, I don't have time or energy to be nervous because I'm spending that energy somewhere else.
Oh, I love that answer. And I love that you keep bringing excited, because it's an emotion we don't often talk about. We talk about gratitude, we talk about the anxiousness, but I love that you bring this idea of excitement to the work that you're doing.
There's one other emotion I should touch on now that we're getting to this word excitement. And the other one that I think is so important for women especially is passion. And so we are often labeled emotional as women in the workplace. And I remember the first time I was called that by a boss, like, I don't want you to get emotional about this. I go, thank you for recognizing my passion. It's my passion that gets shit done around here. And I want to take ownership of that word emotional, and I want to channel it into passion. It's not anger. It's not being calculated. It's not any of those things. It is passion, which means I am excited about doing what I do. And rather than turning it into a negatively nuanced word like emotional, even though emotions are a natural thing to have and there's a lot of positive emotions, I'm going to take ownership of that word and turn it into something that has a much more positive connotation attached to it. And so that's one of the things that I want to make sure, especially those non-dominant groups, are owning in that moment, are taking control of, rather than let someone label you in a negative way. I want you to take it and turn it into what it truly is, something positive. If you are there, if you are getting emotional, you're doing it for a reason and you're channeling it into something productive. So call it out for what it actually is.
Oh, can I add to that list? Enthusiasm, because that's another word that can be used against women as well. You're so enthusiastic, as if it's a negative, similar to passion, right? As if it's a negative. Excellent.
If you can say thank you, I appreciate the compliment. You're gonna turn it on their head, because they don't know what to do with that. Now you're forcing them to realize it's actually not a negative thing at all.
Oh, I have loved this conversation. We are pretty much at time. Are there any final words of advice that you want to share? I know we talked about sort of that mindset piece. Any other tips that you have for people who might be preparing for negotiation? We now just talked about like how to hype yourself up before you walk in with excitement. But during that sort of preparation phase or getting clear on your outcome, is there anything that you have to recommend?
I would say one of the things I tell people is that awareness is a key to success. So whether it's that preparation, then you're aware of the context of the circumstances of how your proposal fits into credibility and all that kind of stuff, being aware of your nerves and being able to do something about those, being aware of, who are the people who are around you, who can support you and so on. The more you can be in that zone of awareness, the easier things are going to be for you, because that is knowledge, and knowledge is power. I have prepared a gift for everybody because I feel like that level of awareness is really important. Continuing to learn is really important. So if you go to my website, fotiniicon.com/quiz, you can learn about your own personal negotiation style. If you take the quiz, you'll learn about what is your style, and I give you tips on How is this helpful to you? And what are some of the watch outs for that? So the more you know about yourself, about your tendencies, about your habits, the more you know about what is out there, what are the average rates, and adding that not average tax and being aware of the fact that you are not average. Those little things are going to go a really long way in terms of boosting your credibility and boosting your confidence and boosting that excitement to get you better results.
Oh, I love that. I'm getting a interesting in the comments as well from the Esteem Agency. I've loved this conversation. We're going to make sure that the name of your book and that link to the quiz are in our show notes as well. Fotini, thank you for your time today.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad that it was helpful for so many people.
It's been such a pleasure to have you. Again, my name is Brooke Gordon. You've been listening to the Best for Women Alive podcast. We've been talking about negotiation. Thank you again, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye.